When the only known Lemmings arcade prototype arrived at the cave, we knew we had to do two things. Firstly, we had to check it over and see if it worked, which thankfully it did, albeit with some graphical glitches. And in that state, we played the game and considered the reasons why it might have been canned before release. Secondly, we have to complete the job. To give Lemmings a home, a period-correct arcade cabinet and artwork, and imagine what the finished arcade machine may have been like if it was released to the public. And that's what today is all about. We're scratch building the unreleased Data East Lemmings arcade machine from 1991. Hello Cave Dwellers, yes, we're planning on doing this build in a single episode. It's a mammoth task, and I've got the help of Richard from Heber. Thanks for joining us, Richard. And I've also got the help of Holly and Dan today. We've got the whole collective mucking in on this task. Now, I've been busy with Jason building the Dev Den, the other current project that's on the go, while Richard's been beavering away down here on our Lemmings arcade cabinet. And there's so much to pack into this episode, I think we should just get straight into it.
Let's go!
So the year is 1991, the Lemmings arcade PCB is in development, but it's not yet ready for public release. So for argument's sake, what do you think, Richard? Would this have come out in 1992, do you think?
I would have thought so, 92, maybe 93 at the latest.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that would be about right.
Because the board, it was nearly finished. We can see why it wasn't released, but it was pretty close.
Yeah, I think they would have made some game refinements and then probably tried to release it, yeah.
And the company that was distributing the arcade was Data East, who are arcade legends, really. They've released well-known games like Bad Dudes. Have you got any favourites, Richard?
Yeah, Bad Dudes is a good one. Bad Dudes versus Dragon Ninja, I like that. Yeah,
RoboCop.
Yeah, RoboCop, that's a big cabinet. Yeah.
Karate Champ, going way back, all sorts of games. They put out a lot of classic arcades over the years. So in figuring out a suitable and period-authentic shape for Lemmings, we should probably take a look over the history of some of Data East's games. So here are some interesting examples. Data East distributed Capcom's Commando in some regions in 1985, and this is quite a classic arcade shape, isn't it? But what stands out, what I really like, is that rounded control panel.
Yes, a lot of them were very rounded and very smooth, so yeah, quite nice.
Yeah, and there's also a nice lip at the back of the control panel that the monitor bezel slots into. I like that feature. Yeah. Quite different to some of the boxier, squarer arcade control panels of the time, so that stands out nicely. And we also see this same style of cabinet in games like Karnov, which I know about, and on this this leaflet here, Kid Nicky. I've not heard of that, have you?
Nope, not heard of that one at all.
So these were 1987 games. New games, new art kits, but you could put them on those existing cabinets and convert cabinets from one game to another to keep the cash boxes full. That was important, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But the cabinets did need to evolve to keep up with the competition. By 1988, we start to see the rounded marquee appear on games like Bad Dudes versus Dragon Ninja. And I think this works especially well on RoboCop because it's like a theatrical shape, isn't it? Like the front
cinematic,
of a movie theatre. Yeah, so that works great with a game like RoboCop. And we also saw other examples of this cabinet in Vigilante in 1988 and Sly Spy in 1989, which was essentially a James Bond rip-off, wasn't it?
It was.
Although you may well have seen these games also transplanted into older cabinets because, while it's lovely to have a premium arcade cabinet and the latest thing, arcade operators like to keep costs down, and wherever they can, they will fudge something into something else, or at the other end of the scale, full-on bootlegs.
Definitely, yeah, we saw a lot of bootlegs.
Moving now into the year of the Lemmings home computer release in 91, Data East released Desert Assault, which has a huge 4-player control panel on it. Our marquee is now back to a flat style, you can see at the top there. And this is also the same in Captain America, 4 players or a great big control panel and a flat marquee at the top. We also see 2-player games released like Caveman Ninja, and that's also reverted to the flat marquee while retaining the same control panel that we see in games like RoboCop. So companies like Data East are always trying to keep things fresh, but also affordable for operators. And then we found the game that we really felt was a good balance for Lemmings. It was a little remembered game, at least I'd never heard of it, called Night Slashers. Did you know of this one, Richard?
I didn't, but as soon as I saw it, I dived into finding more about it and just being really interested in the game itself. But yeah, it was the cabinet that caught our eye.
The cabinet,
definitely.
yeah. So the cabinet was not exclusive to Data East. It's what's known as a Z-back or a Z-back cabinet. as you can see in this leaflet, the shape of it. It's got that zigzag back. This cabinet wasn't exclusive to Data East, but what appealed to me was that it had a large enough control panel to accommodate the trackballs. We were thinking ahead to 2 trackballs because it's a 2-player game, and the buttons needed to comfortably play Lemmings together. And I think we agree it still retains that Data East charm of the older games. It's got things like a slightly different control panel.
Definitely,
Quite a nice shape to that control panel, isn't there?
It's got a really interesting shape, one I've not really seen before in any type of cabinet. It's certainly the thing that drew me to the cabinet in the first place. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's that part of the episode where I say a big thank you to PCBWay.com for supporting the channel. If you're working on your own project and you need PCB manufacturing, 3D printing, CNC work and much more besides, then PCBWay.com is the place to go. And while you're there, make sure you check out their shared project section, which is just rammed full of projects to support vintage hardware. It's well worth a look. Thank you, PCBWay.com.
So we were quickly in agreement that this is the cabinet that we want to use for Lemmings. It feels fresh. It feels like we're looking ahead to the 90s and not back to the mid-80s with this style of cabinet. So this is what we're going to work with. The next thing we need to do is build it from scratch. And we didn't quite have the workbench. No, we had the tools. We didn't quite have the workbench, this thing here, on which to build an entire arcade cabinet. And looking ahead, we definitely need one for all of the future projects we want to build. So, Richard, you set about building a workbench before anything else, didn't you?
Yeah, it was the first job of the day. We needed a solid workbench to work on. These big sheets of ply are very heavy, so you couldn't use a fold-out table or anything like a trolley. So we really wanted something really solid. And that was the first step, yeah.
And in doing so, 3D printed, of course, it's Richard, 3D printing had to be involved. 3D printing things started to appear. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so I was very conscious I wanted an overhanging workbench so I could bolt things down, use various implements on the workbench, and I wanted rounded corners. So 3D printed jig to cut the rounded corners out. And all the idea there is to screw that into the corner and give myself a curve that I could then cut around and then route out so it was really nice and smooth. I didn't want any rough edges. And that was what gave me the idea.
And that did give Richard another idea, which really helped with this project. And we'll come to that in a minute as we get into the footage now of Richard. Well, you've seen him here as we've been talking, building his workbench, and then we'll get on to the building of the arcade. But just briefly, before we get to that, Holly was diagnosing the graphical glitches on the Lemmings PCB. So while we did play it in part 1, there were some minor graphical glitches. And thankfully, owner Mike Daly from DMA Design, when he got this board originally, he did have the presence of mind to dump the ROMs to make backups of them. And that's why it can be played on MAME if you fancy giving it a go yourselves, assuming you own an original PCB so that you can legally download the ROMs.
Oh, yes. This
and there's
PCB.
only one PCB. Anyway, swiftly moving on. Holly did find some differences when she compared the ROMs on here with the ROMs that had been backed up previously. So that told her she needed to reflash the ROMs to get them back to their original state. On doing that, we quickly found the graphical glitches were cleaned up. So that was a nice quick fix. And she did also find one broken trace that related to the trackballs. And we also put these lovely stickers on here because it had old floppy disk labels on the ROMs. And Dan, who you'll see more of later from Retrofied, made us these lovely stickers to go over the windows. So the board is all ready, but we still need a cabinet to put it in. Cue Richard and his fancy new workbench, which I think he's finished here. Have you finished it yet, Richard?
Yeah, it didn't take too long. It was good, nice and solid.
Good. I thought we were going to get an entire episode of workbench building.
Now we have our workbench all solid and completed, we can actually get on to building the Night Slashers cab. This is a Data East cabinet that we're going to be creating out of 18mm ply. So the idea is to use a 3D printed jig to get exactly the right shape and form for the cabinet, jigsaw around it, and then route around that using the jig as a guide so we end up with really nice smooth edges. They can then be cut down on the sides to allow the T-molding strip to go on. So first we've got to get the ply onto this table, put the jig on and see if we can get it all lined up to be able to cut round. We've got some convenient pictures of a restoration of a Night Slashers cab going on here, so I can use that as a guide for any of the internal fixings that we might need. We will end up, hopefully by the end of today, with a cabinet that we can actually put Dan's lovely artwork on. So that's the goal, to try and end up with Night Slasher's cab for Lemmings today.
So we can see here Richard is screwing that guide into the 18mm external ply, which is, I think you find it much nicer to work with than MDF, don't you?
Yeah, it's much nicer. It's not as dense, it's not as heavy. It cuts really nicely and you can finish it nice and smoothly. Yeah.
And they're about £25 a sheet for this ply, so
Yeah.
pretty affordable. He's checking here the position of the monitor that's going in, just to make sure, I guess, the viewing angle is comfortable.
Viewing
and it
angle
fits.
and depth. I wanted to make
Okay.
sure we had enough depth in the cabinet, because I did measure it all up, but you're never quite sure until you get it on the bench. And just double check that.
First cut that you do, that's the rough shape of the cabinet. So you've drawn around your jig, you've got a rough cut with the jigsaw, and then you're fine-tuning it with the router here. Is that what's happening?
That's right, yeah. So we're just using the jig to give ourselves a quick cut round with the jigsaw, so you can be really quick with that. You don't have to be that close, you don't have to be that accurate. You just need to roughly get it cut to size, and then you put the jig screwed back on and then use that as the guide, so we can then actually route around and have a really nice smooth edge.
Hard to go wrong then with that jig on.
Unless you slip up by moving the router or doing something you're not intending to. Yeah, as long as you take it slowly and turn the router on and off as you start and stop, it should all work fine. So pretty much foolproof.
So when the jig's job is done, that can be packed away, and then the second panel, you cut that to the shape of the first to make sure that they exactly match up. So you're using the first as your guide for this one. And you were doing this during a public day with visitors to the cave and the Arcade Archive popping in to chat with you and see your progress through the day. Did that slow you down a little?
It slowed me down a little, but it was really nice.
Yeah.
So people can actually see the process. A few people gave a bit of a hand as well, lifting things on and off. So that was nice. But yeah, talking it through with people and seeing the excitement that they could see that we were actually doing this live, that was really good.
Yeah.
Really good experience.
And really nice for some of our more regular visitors who see it at this point and then will come back and see it completed and play it in the arcade. So that was it's lovely to share. And we're doing that more and more in this space here in this workshop, which is evolving. We're going to make it into an ever more functional workshop, aren't we, with more and more tools?
Yeah, now we've got our bench, we're going to have some storage, we have space to do things, cut things, and it's still evolving all the time, but it's just going to allow us to do more maintenance and more of these types of builds.
Yeah. So with those two sides cut, the other panels, they were slightly more simple shapes, weren't they, to cut and easier to fabricate. And then Richard started putting the internal supports in and the frame to join the pieces together, and it's really starting to look like an arcade at this point. This being a Sunday, Richard then swept up the workshop before the next part to the sound of the church over the road. Let's just enjoy this for a moment. Very nice, Richard. And then it was time to flesh this build out with the monitor bezel, the marquee, and the rear door that you're fabricating here. But the control panel, that would need a different approach, and yes,
Obviously, it needs to be 3D printed.
It needed to be 3D printed. So Richard, you set about designing it. Here it is on the screen. In which package did you use? Or
I used FreeCAD and SharkCAD for this one. So fleshed out the 2D design, extruded it, and I had to do it in 3 sections because the 3D printers were only going to have a certain height, and actually you need to do that so you can make it printable really, and then bolt it all together. So yeah, it turned out really quite nicely actually. I would love to see a real Night Slasher's cab to see how they did it, because I'm sure it has a metal bent over panel with possibly 2 panels stuck on that side, and they might be wood, they might be metal, I don't know. So it'd be really interesting to know that. But yeah, it was a very easy thing for the 3D printer to do. It would have been particularly difficult to do that by hand.
Mm-hmm. And then Richard, you've 3D printed more guides. So this one here you're using is the speaker guide.
We've got that for the speaker guide, and we've also got one for handles at the back.
And one for the coin door as well. So everything can be aligned perfectly, cut really easily, and we can make sure we get that right, because at this point you don't want any mishaps when you've got this far into the build process.
No, although we did only use 3 sheets of wood and we did have some left over, so even if I would have messed up one of the sheets, I think we would have been okay. But yeah, it was a really good build. We didn't have much wastage at the end.
Yeah. And the monitor now, tell us about the monitor that's going in here. What size is it?
So this is a 19-inch Cortec monitor. It's a new old stock monitor, so it's a really nice, really ready to go. It's basically like the prototype that would have been when it was first made, because it would have just had a monitor this fresh.
Yeah. But that's not to say it will turn on first time and look perfect.
No.
Because it's been in the box for decades.
Yeah, it needs some bedding in. With some of the other replacements we've used in the arcade, they need a couple of weeks just to bed in and just reform those capacitors and that sort of thing.
But when they do, they look superb.
They
No
do
burning,
look really nice.
obviously. They just look absolutely brilliant. So how many of these did we have? Was it 10 of these?
I think it was 10 or 11, yeah.
Yeah, so we're working through them. So if you come and visit the arcade here, all of the monitors, there are one or two that are older, slightly more worn out, burning monitors, but a lot of them look fresh, and it's not because they're LCDs.
These are fresh new CRTs.
Then our friend Mike Daly came to visit, and we took the chance to show him our progress so far and run through some of the design ideas for the artwork. So art is the forte of Dan from retrofied.uk, who has become ever more part of the family here and the collective. He's a huge help here, and he's helping us transform a lot of cabinets. So in this little 3D printed cab here, we had our first design, but over time and through talking to Mike as well, we did deviate from the original design, which was a bit more complex. It had things like gradients on here, and we actually wound it back a bit to be a flat blue color. And I, in particular, having looked at other Data East cabs, I wanted to get the Data East logo on there because I noticed a lot of them have very simple side art, and a lot of Data East cabinets only have the Data East logo on the side.
Yeah, they're just a solid color with just a logo. Yeah.
And as an operator, that then made it quicker to just swap the marquee and the control panel when you were changing games. But we did want a little bit more than that. We did want the lemmings on there. So we deviated from our original design. We chose the color blue from the swatches that Dan has, and we ordered the incredibly hard-wearing vinyl that Dan likes to use on these arcade cabinets from his experience of many years, mostly in the motor business, sports cars, putting vinyl on sports cars. So this is really hard-wearing stuff.
Yeah.
And with everyone in agreement, we ordered the vinyl that we needed. It turned up within a few days, and Dan got on with the job of applying the vinyl. So the final push to get this cabinet finished, first of all, he puts on our base blue color, which you can see him doing here. And then he trims around the edges to get a nice finish on it. Any rough edges right at the edge will be hidden by the T-molding, won't they? That does a pretty good job of giving us a nice clean edge. And then it was time to leminify the arcade. So here they go on there. Now the art style that we went for here, I would say, is just a little bit more cartoony than the original box art in 1991, but we're not going to the extreme of 3D lemmings in 95, which appeared on things like the PlayStation and the PC, where it looked a bit more like that pre-rendered 3D type effect, because that's the way everything was going in the mid-90s. So we just wanted to find that sweet spot where it felt fresh for an arcade, but it didn't feel like we just lifted the home computer up.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
I think so. I think we've ended up with a really crisp, fresh look to it, and as you say, not too overcomplicated. Yeah.
But despite Richard's best efforts, we did draw the line at this pelt of lemmings fur, which is just, look, this is why it's just shedding immediately. It would have been all over the arcade. Richard had great ideas to fit this as part of the artwork, lemmings hair or something like this. This was found in the recent video. Do you remember the damp storage container that we salvaged some of these cabinets from? That was in there. It has been washed, don't worry. But we did think better of it in the end.
Yeah, I think it was the right choice. It would have been funny, but
put that
you
down
can
there.
see it's not quite right for the arcade. And yes, it has managed to get green fur all over the workshop.
We did even at one point talk about putting a fan in the cabinet so that when you nuke the lemmings, it just blasts green fur out the top. But we had to wind ourselves back in. So yeah, you know.
It's all good for the ideas.
The creative process. So the art's on. The art then went on the control panel. I'm just going to tease you a bit here as the control panel goes on. The bezel went on. The speakers were connected up. The wiring loom went in. This is standard jammer wiring in here.
Standard jammer, yes, although we've got 2 extra cables for the trackballs, yeah.
Okay. The board goes in, but we've also put a secondary device in here. Now, this is the first time I think this has ever been seen publicly.
Yeah.
What's this, Richard?
So this is our MultiPie jammer. It's a evolution of our MultiPie platform, dedicated for jammer systems. So it's for the arcade.
I don't think at the time of recording this is even on sale yet, but it's going to be on sale
very
shortly.
Soon. Yeah, very shortly.
Okay.
It's the next one in the lineup of the MultiPie range. So if you want to get a console now, the MultiPie is available to pre-order, and the MultiPie jammer will be 100% compatible with it. It has basically a control dock built on, so you can have all of those real arcade controls like spinners, trackballs, all those other things.
So there you go. That's our backup device in here. So a little bit of modern and the original board. And without further ado, I think it's time now that we go over to the arcade archive to see it in all its glory and to play it, because I haven't played it with the trackball yet, and I haven't played it 2-player yet because I just tried it out on my own in that first episode. So let's go and give it a go and show you the imagined, what did I call it? I can't remember at the start of the episode.
I think it was reimagined.
The Lemmings that never was, now is. Let's take a look. So we waited for the rain to stop, and Richard and Dan and I wheeled it across the car park. And that's when I spotted something, Richard. You had managed to work the green fur onto it.
I did sneak in a mohawk right at the back. No one's going to see it, but I know it's there.
Yeah, you wouldn't know unless you knew it was there. So we've got a mohawk on Lemmings, and you can now see as it comes into the arcade. Oh no, the artwork. I think Dan did an incredible job on this. I don't know about you, Richard, but my biggest fear about this whole project was that we would end up with something that looked more like a home arcade build, and I really, really wanted it to look like it belonged in a real arcade.
Absolutely. I think from the first moment we said we were going to do a scratch build, that was my worry as well. It was like, I don't want it to look like something you've built in your garage.
Yeah.
Even though we built it in our workshop, I think it still turned out really well. And that is 100% to do with the artwork.
It is the artwork. Well, the shape of the cabinet, the quality of the construction, which you put so much effort into, and then the artwork as well. The little touches like the Data East logos, the instructions that have been put on here, which have been lifted from the Attract screen. So we've taken the text and put the instructions on there. The 3D printed control panel worked out beautifully. I love the shape of it, and the trackballs.
They do. They feel really nice, don't they? Yeah, they're really nice to use.
And a really fun thing that I didn't realise, there's a lot of Lemmings dying there, until just a moment ago when you were testing this, was that throughout this whole process that you put so many hours into, you hadn't even played the game.
No.
You hadn't played, you'd obviously played Lemmings, but not the arcade game until this point. How did you find it?
I thought it was really good. A lot more actually addictive. It makes you want to put the money in. I think this would be a really interesting arcade. It would have been a good game to play. So yeah, really, really enjoyed it actually playing it for the first time.
I think it would have hooked a certain type of player, which is why when I tried out in part 1, I didn't really get it. And I said, this isn't, I understand why this wasn't released, but then seeing the joy that you got out of it made me think, okay, there are certain people who would have pumped a lot of money into this. Yeah. It must have come that close to release. I don't know. I'd love to find out from someone who was involved in the project as to why it wasn't released. Anyway, overall, I'm really satisfied with the finish. There's one thing that is a bit odd. It's this sound. It's like something's dropping into a toilet, isn't it?
It does sound like a bit of a drop in a toilet. It really is. So whether that's just they know you're putting more and more coins in, you're pumping more and more. Maybe you're flushing that away. Who knows? We're putting more coins in. But yeah, that is a strange sound effect.
It's great, isn't it? And the bezel is great with the artwork. All original art by Dan. I was a bit worried that the 19-inch screen might be too small, but absolutely not. It works.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
And the monitor, it's looking better than it did when we first turned it on, because this was new old stock, and it was very soft and was it overexposed when we first turned it on?
A little bit overexposed, oversaturated.
Bit of tuning, but also a bit of reforming of the caps and just letting it bed in. Yeah. And I think it's going to get better again in time.
It will, yeah. It's getting more and more into focus and getting sharper and looking nice.
Yeah. So there it is. I hope you enjoyed the build. Thank you to Richard for all the effort you put in. Thank you to Dan. Thank you to Holly for diagnosing some of the faults on this. And if you want to come and try it out for yourself, head to retrocollective.co.uk where you can book a ticket to come to the cave and to the Arcade Archive. This is going to start out in the Arcade Archive. It might go up to the cave eventually. Not sure. It'll float about in the museums. Come and try it out. Bring a friend, try it out 2-player. Check out the multi-pie jammer that we've got in here as a backup that we talked about. Oh yes, at shop.heber.co.uk. That's Richard and Heber's shop. And well, you'll find all the links to everything in the video description, including Retrofied, where Dan is, and all of the great work that he does. It's great when a project like this brings the whole collective together, and you can see, well, the sum of all of our efforts. I'm really happy with the result. So thank you to everyone who was involved, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.